let's jump into this first story. And it's kind of a crazy story, I suppose. It's either really, really good, unless, I guess, you're a Democrat, then you're probably really angry about it if you're a Black Lives Matter protester. The Florida Senate has passed the controversial anti-riot bill pushed in the wake of Black Lives Matter protests. Governor Ron DeSantis championed the legislation and is expected to sign it as early as next week. One of the things it does that Democrats are really mad about is that if you are in your car and a group of protesters are in the street and you're trying to escape them, you are immune from civil liability if you drive through them. So it's, you want to make sure you get all that context in there, but they're freaking out because they're trying to make it seem like they're granting immunity to people literally slamming the gas and like crashing into people. That's not the case. But there are a bunch of other provisions that make certain things a felony. Now, I'll say this because I'll need your help on this one, Will. Mm-hmm. I tried looking up what the bill does specifically, like a breakdown. Unfortunately, if you go to right-wing sites, they tell you very specific things like this becomes a felony. Certain left-wing sites say very biased things. And reading through it, it's like, I don't know how many, it's not that many pages, but it's very poorly written. Mm-hmm. So can you give us the gist of what this anti-riot law does? Sure.
Well, I actually found like their summary. I went to the Florida legislature and got an idea of what they're doing. I think the biggest thing it does, it's really, first off, there's a lot of enhanced penalties. So if you're, committing one of these crimes like inciting a riot, participating in a riot, there's like a mandatory minimum for assaulting a police officer now of 6 months, for example. It also means that if you're participating in a riot and you get arrested, you can't get bailed out before you appear in court. So it's like the sort of in and out. I think that's a great one. It has this anti-defunding the police provision, which essentially makes the state, before a city wants to defund its police, it needs permission from the state government. It looks like this is an interesting one, and I think this is the one that has to do with the whole the defense about, like, if you run someone over. It says it creates an affirmative defense in a civil action arising from a riot if the plaintiff's injury or damage was sustained as a result of participating in a riot. So that sort of shuts off any sort of lawsuits by rioters. Like if you're in a riot and you get assaulted or something. So it's actually beyond. So the Democrats were the ones framing it as though you could run your car through them. Right. But in actually, it's much broader than that. Like, well, it's civil liability too, right? Like, I think that's a good example, right? You're participating in a riot, and I don't actually know the extent of this affirmative defense. I'd actually need to read it, like, how far that goes. But the basic concept, if somebody is escaping, you don't have the right to sue them because you are participating in a riot and they were trying to get out of it. And why do we need a law for that? If you're committing a felony and I'm trying to escape, why am I liable for this? Apparently, I think it's good to just make it really clear, actually, because one of the things, I have a very strong view about people stopping traffic. I consider, that should be false imprisonment. It should be treated as a very serious crime. I really disagree with you on that one. I think protesters stopping traffic, it's like straight to jail, everybody, and throw the book at those people, because it's incredibly selfish. There are people who are trying to just get to work, go to their jobs. Ambulance. It's incredibly scary, right? You're just like, you're at the mercy of this mob. And it's the most selfish way to protest possible. It's completely indifferent to like the amount of time and energy you're taking away from everybody who's blocked. You're just deciding you're more important than they are. That becomes a felony, right? Blocking traffic. I think so. I think part of the bill makes it like a third-degree felony. I think they've been much more aggressive about it. And I really disagree with that one. I think that if it was just a bunch of, say, like, I don't know, Code Pink, and they're holding hands in the middle of DC singing songs, and the cops have to walk up and one by one arrest them and remove them, and it takes 20 or 30 minutes. Nonviolent civil disobedience is a good thing. We don't want people to be getting violent. I'm okay with that, except do it on the sidewalk. Like, get out of the road. Well, that's the point. The point is to create some kind of circumstance where it generates attention. And my point is that I think that's not something we should incentivize, and instead that we should deter. I think a fair point is that people standing in the road create a very serious risk standing in a road, and you probably shouldn't stand in a road, period. Right. My thing is more just like we need to make sure there's a space maintained where people can be, to a certain degree, disruptive, peacefully and nonviolently, and it's already illegal. So typically what happens is when people are holding hands in the street, they immediately get arrested. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it takes longer if they use like chains to like link their hands together, or those like metal tubes. But when a peaceful protester stands in the street, the cop walks up, cuffs them, and walks them away. They clear the traffic relatively quickly, and the protesters get their point across. They do get charged. It's usually a misdemeanor, slap on the wrist. And then they're not going around smashing windows and beating people in the streets like they're doing now. I think, like, Well, there's already laws that are, we aren't seriously punishing people in the road, and they still, I don't think that's a way to divert them from breaking windows. I think it's
a felony is kind of intense though for that, man.
Right, but then don't do it. Like, just don't do it. It's the law. Don't do it. I mean,
I think you have to think about the worst case scenario, right? Like, what if an ambulance is trying to get through this traffic and they can't? Or like, there was a video that went viral a while ago of some guy, he got out of his car and a mob was blocking him from getting in the road, and this is a doctor. And he was like, he worked in the ER or something. He was like, I need to get to work. Like, I have patience.
The challenge, I suppose, is the difference between an unruly mob in the street and like a bunch of hippies holding hands singing, and then the cops come and clear them out.
Yeah, I think those are different things. But in this scenario, it was a giant mob of people in an intersection.
Right, that's like a riot.
And what's stopping the hippies from getting a permit? Like, if you want to march in the street, get a permit. There's ways to do that.
I don't know, man. First Amendment says peaceably assemble.
Well, do you guys remember the LA riots more recently? Not the actual LA riots like in the 60s, but there were LA riots. Yeah.
The
60s.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit off, like 30 years.
What?
They blocked a highway in LA, and there was an ambulance that was stuck in the traffic, and a little girl died because of it. Like, that's, for me, the biggest argument against, like, blocking traffic. And I kind of agree with Will.
Then they should be charged with murder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right? Like, that's a serious issue.
Well, I think we should just, at the outset, just deter this behavior entirely. Like, I mean, if people actually start going to jail for serious time for doing this, it will stop. People will find other ways to make their point heard. And there's plenty of ways in this world to get your point across.
Yeah. My main thing is, like, if it's already illegal, why are we making more laws for it?
Because people are still doing it, so the punishments aren't severe enough, apparently.
I'm not sure that they care. I mean, I will say, a point I've made in the past few days is that the cost for rioting is too low, and these people know this. Even though it is a felony to go and burn a building to the ground, they know they're going to get cut loose. You see that lady in Portland who burned down or set fire to the police union building? They released her without bail.
Yeah,
they released her. Yeah, it's just
rioting is not drug addiction where people can't stop.
Right.
Like, and that it's not, and therefore it's like overly punitive and draconian. No, you don't have to riot. You have no addiction to rioting. You are just doing it because you want to. So stop it. And we just need to change the law so that people go right to jail.
This woman, apparently she got informed on because one of these Antifa guys in Portland is apparently a snitch. She was arrested apparently last year, I guess, and she was released and all the charges were dropped. If this woman if the charges were not dropped and she got a year in jail or a year plus in prison, she would not have been there to set fire to this police association building. They cut her loose, dropped the charges, and they knew she was a violent, terroristic extremist. Then she goes and does it again, and what happens? She gets I think it's 5 felony charges.
Wow.
And they release her without bail, on her own recognizance, I think that's called, right?
Right. And I mean, the beauty of doing this in conservative states, there's a lot of blue cities, and there's still blue cities in Florida, but all of a sudden they've got the state attorney general can come in and tell them to knock it off. Right now, Oregon is totally dependent on federal law enforcement, and the FBI run by a Republican administration at some point in the future. Otherwise, you're just SOL.
Yeah. I like the you can't get released until your first court hearing. You're caught in a riot. There are challenges about this. Typically, my thing is Blackstone's formulation, the presumption of innocence. It's really difficult to you might be walking through the wrong place at the wrong time, and they'll charge you with being in a riot. And then what then?
Right. Well, I mean, I think the right answer is to really reduce the number of riots. Like that. Let's start there. If we just reduce the number of riots, then that also reduces the number of people who are randomly walking through. It makes police's job a lot easier. It means they can focus on combating crime in their cities and not have to send these huge forces of people just to deal with unruly rioters.
So when I asked about why make new laws if it's already illegal, you said something to the effect of the punishment must not have been severe enough.
Right. Like, if it's still happening despite being illegal all the time, we are not deterring it sufficiently.
Because the district attorneys aren't prosecuting it.
That might be true, but this is a solution to that as well, right? If you create new state laws with severe punishments and, essentially you create an environment also where the state attorney general is going to want to enforce those laws if local district attorneys are not. And that authority, I'm pretty sure, is always there.
So long as at the state level. I guess my bigger concern then is one of the statements made by Democrats is that this is going to be disproportionately used. It's going to be biased. It's going to be used against them. They're half right. I think if you look at the evidence, they've consistently, the Black Lives Matter, the Antifa, have consistently gotten away with serious violent extremism. I mean, how many people died in the riots or peripheral to the riots of last year? It was like 30-something.
30-something, yeah.
Yeah.
There were 19, I think, deaths directly related, and then peripheral deaths like people in ambulances that couldn't get to the hospital and stuff like that. These people have gotten away with it. I mean, Kamala Harris solicited donations to get these people out of jail. Joe Biden's staff donated to these funds to get these people out of jail, and then people voted for them. Then you look at the people at the Capitol. There's one lady, apparently the door was open and she had no idea what was going on until she walked in, you know, dumbfounded and bewildered like everybody else. And now she's in solitary confinement facing like 40 years in prison.
Yeah, I mean, that's the status quo. The left gets off a lot easier. And that's not all about like selective prosecution. That's also about, you know, 50 to 60 years of leftist organizing infrastructure and protest infrastructure still existing. I mean, the National Lawyers Guild, they're still around. And in the 70s, they were hiding terrorists, right? Weather Underground terrorists. And it's amazing when you actually read about what the 70s Weather Underground did. They were bombing all over the place. And they just got 6 months. They got like probation.
Who was it?
When they finally, they were fugitives for 10 years and they finally turned themselves in and got probation.
Who was Weather Underground? I've heard of them a lot.
Bill Ayers.
So Weather Underground came out of Students for Democratic Society, a radical left-wing student group. After, in the very early 70s, they made the decision that, you know, the revolution is coming. And so after like they went to a big protest in Chicago and a bunch of them got indicted on various like rioting, assault charges, a bunch of them, instead of returning to face those charges, they went underground. Which at the time just meant, well, okay, I'm not going to show up for my court date. I'm not going to be a fugitive, and I'm going to go get, you know, new identity documents and just live under the radar and not be employed. It was much easier to do then because it was just easy to get a fake ID.
Yep. No internet.
Right. So that was, you know, and so there was a group. It ended up being about like 150 left-wing people, and they started out. Apparently there was a plan to actually go after and set off bombs at an army base while people were there. That failed, and ultimately a bunch of them killed themselves in a bomb accident in their own townhouse.
Wow.
And then after that, they decided we're only going to bomb things symbolically. But they were, you know, there was a bombing campaign all over the place where they would just set off bombs and, you know, energy stations and random places to make a political point.
So we have decades of that infrastructure and the remnants of that still exist today.
Yeah.
So when it comes to this new law, how long until a Democrat wins Florida? Assuming they do. Maybe it swings back hard the other direction in the next few years. Maybe not. Maybe, I mean, it was fairly close this time around. Democrat takes over, and then all of a sudden the Republicans find themselves with a boot on their face.
Well, I mean, it's possible, but, you know, I think Republicans generally don't riot. And, you know, one of the things I said about January 6th is the reason they were even able to get into the Capitol is because Republicans generally don't do that. You know,
so they weren't prepared for
it. The Capitol Police weren't prepared for it at all. They were really understaffed.
What if a right-wing group decides to march around and they got flags and they find themselves marching in the street? Then all of a sudden they're all committing felonies and they all get locked up.
I mean, don't do that. The law says don't do it. Obey the law.
But if you're a regular person and you're coming out waving your flag and you're on a street corner and everyone's cheering, and then you start marching and then you're in the street not realizing what's going on, you don't know the law, and then all of a sudden they're like, thank you so much for this law. That's 50-year-old grandmother is now a felon, and they lock her up and they put her in solitary.
I mean, they've already done that in federal law.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So it's like I expect more.
It's quite possible that Democrats will use this stuff against us, but I mean, I think the net trade-off, given how few sort of riots there are from the right, like January 6th was such a bizarre aberration. I mean, I remember just being surprised. It's like, our side never does this. Left did this all summer and all the time. The right never does this.
I literally published a video at 1 p.m. that day where I was like, nothing's happening. Trump's speaking. Everyone's waving little flags. This is boring.
Yeah.
And then 10 minutes later, they pushed past the barricade. And then 40 minutes later, you know.
Oh, it's so stupid.
Yeah.
So stupid. So anyway, I mean, I'm not pro rioting. Like, I just don't care. Don't riot.
I'm concerned how they redefine riot in the coming years, because if they make a law about what you can and can't do when you're rioting, then all of a sudden they're going to make a law about what the word riot means.
That's in it. It changes it to 3 or more people engaging in tumultuous activity.
So if I go on the corner and start playing music and I have 4 people around me yelling and they're excited, they could say I'm rioting.
Maybe, but then there's always this First Amendment constraint in the background, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, I think, and I'm confident in the ability of federal courts to enforce the First Amendment and strike down, laws, even just as applied, right? If they try to use one of these riot laws to something that is clearly First Amendment protected activity, I'm confident a court would strike it down.
What are they going to do about journalists who are there covering it? One, there's the problem of people there who are actual journalists who have, their cameras and stuff. And then there's people who fake it. There have been a lot of people at these riots who have fake press credentials. So are they going to arrest everybody, including people who are there as reporters? Or are they going to let reporters go and then have people fake it?
They'll arrest them. They,
two of our reporters got arrested.
Yeah. I remember, I'll tell you this, the simple thing is, if you're a journalist and you're working the protest beat, be nice to the cops, like be calm, very calm, and have your press credentials readily available. Ask for a supervisor very calmly and politely. If it doesn't happen, keep your mouth shut. So I've been in so many of these circumstances, and I remember in D.C. on Trump's inauguration, several journalists got pulled out of the mass arrest. I was one of them. Why? I had my card. I asked for a supervisor. The guy came over and said, "You're under arrest." I was like, "Just want to let you know I'm pressed." And he goes, "No, doesn't matter." I was like, "You got it. Just letting you know." He came back later and he looked at some journalists and he was like, "You come with me. You come with me." And I was like, yo, and I come with me. He pulled us out, showed me your card. He said, "All right, you guys are good to go. Sorry about that." Some other journalists were in the crowd screaming at the top of their lungs, "You mother effer, you can't arrest my journalist!" And they went to jail. And then they had all of the activists cheer them on. And they came out, and these people are hardcore activists. That's why they're screaming at cops and they're angry. So as part of the job, you're not supposed to get arrested, but you get arrested. A real professional journalist, in my opinion, gets arrested and they grumble about it and they keep their mouth shut and they let their boss know the moment it's happening if they can. They say, they'll yell to someone, "Tell, Channel 5 I'm being arrested," and then they'll peacefully put their hands behind the back and then go through the motions. And then when the station will call them, the police usually say, "Okay, you're free to go." But when you scream in their faces and start a fight, then you get locked up.
If you're screaming at the cops and starting a fight with them, you're probably not a real journalist or a real reporter.
Yep. I think it's fair to say. We defend the act of journalism. Someone becomes a journalist the moment they're engaging in journalism. But if you combine at any point the act of journalism with the act of rioting or screaming at cops, now you're an active participant. You may be an act of journalism, but you're also, I'll put it this way. The First Amendment says peaceably assemble, meaning if you violently assemble or illegally assemble, then you're not peaceably assembling. Illegal is where it gets interesting, and there are probably case law challenges, but the general idea is if you're not breaking the law or putting people at risk, you're probably fine. The same thing is true for if you're engaging in an act of the press. If you start acting violently, the press is implied that you're being peaceful. If you're now throwing bricks at people and filming it, that's not journalism, I think it's fair to say.
If this were to
filming yourself throw bricks is not journalism.
This is in Florida? Is this where this is?
Yeah.
But there's like, I think 13 states that have the same bill.
So if it went through, then would a journalist who steps onto the street be committing a felony?
Doubtful.
Well, they could charge it, but I don't think it would fly. They could charge it because they'll say, let's say you're there and you're filming and you're in a group of 3 or more engaging in tumultuous activity. They'll say, you're in the street, felony, you're under arrest. Then you'll probably have to go before a judge. You'll tell the judge, "I'm a reporter, here's where I work." The judge will be like, "Okay, you're free to go." If you can't prove you work somewhere, he'll probably say, "I don't believe you. Your court date is this." It's tough. It's not easy. The First Amendment is interesting. It defends the press, but now everybody's the press. So I guess the problem now is like the question you ask. If you're a journalist and you enter the street and you're obstructing it now, you got a problem.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm looking at the statute. It changes the definition to someone who participates in a violent public disturbance involving an assembly of 3 or more persons.
Oh, okay.
Has to be violent.
Acting with a common intent to assist each other in a violent and disorderly context. So yeah, violence is part of rioting.
That wouldn't include journalists or
journalists are free then.
Perfect.
Unless you're filming yourself throwing bricks at people and calling them journalists.
I mean, if you're filming and throwing a water bottle, then the more important part is you're throwing a water bottle.
Right, exactly.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.